Welcome to the Beatlemaniacs. Haven't said that since I think January of 2023. Is that correct, guys?
It's been a while.
Sounds about right.
It's been a while, and a lot of stuff is happening in the Beatle world. And I want to talk about the two main things that are going on. Is the Beatles single, their last single officially, and the proliferation and the debut of AI.
I don't know how I should feel about this because I know this is the song that's coming out that George Harrison was totally against releasing. In fact, I think a quote, if I'm going to paraphrase it, is it was pure rubbish. And evidently the rubbish occurred with the hissing that was involved. And if I understand correctly, all the AI did was remove the hissing. It did not enhance any or create a voice or create part of the song. I think it removed that hissing sound that was on the original cassette tape. So that might make a difference, but I'm a little curious as to why it's being released now after George objected to it so strongly back in 1995.
That's a question that I had as well. Now, back in 1994 or 5, I don't think they were strictly using AI. I don't think it had been developed quite yet. It was some sort of a digital thing. Dave, what do you know about it?
I really don't know. And I guess my opinion is just kind of wait and see. I was thinking about it the other day too. I'm not too concerned about, changing a legacy or anything like that. I think most fans are able to separate it. When you hear "Free as a Bird" and "Real Love," they are what they are, and it's different. But so I think this will be interesting, but I'm willing to wait and see. Very curious, and it's new Beatles material, so I'll take it.
If you can call it Beatles material, because I really can't. Just like I couldn't do with "Real Love" and "Free as a Bird," I really couldn't classify this as real Beatles material. It just seems almost like a desperate desire to have the Beatles back in any form possible, even if it's inferior to anything that they did in person. Did you hear about the snippet of "Because" that they're putting in there?
No.
I didn't hear that.
So to get the harmonies and to have George involved vocally, they're putting a snippet of the chorus in "Because." There was 3-part harmony in "Because," like the ahs,
Wow.
So I don't know. It's like it's kind of like a Frankenstein's monster of a Beatles song. That's the way I would look at it.
Is McCartney the one that's behind this, or is Ringo on board as well?
Well, I saw a report that Ringo actually didn't want to play on it at first, and Paul had to talk him into it. So it's that's why I say it's like almost like a desperate ploy to have any sort of a last Beatles song.
I didn't hear that about Ringo, but what I did hear was that I think it was a quote by Ringo saying that John Lennon's voice was not going to be changed in any way or altered, right? It was just like you said, the hissing and just making his actual voice a lot clearer.
I think that's the same with what I heard. And I think of the hissing, you could hear it on "Free as a Bird."
Yeah.
That sounds like it was recorded with the cassette player sitting on top of the piano.
Yep.
And I imagine that if they could clean that up, they would have at the time.
There was an interview with the guy from Penn and Teller, about this project. I forget who was interviewing him, but he seemed to have some knowledge about what was going on here. And he said that Paul wanted to have this project done, but he didn't really say it was now and then. Everyone's assuming it's now and then, and it may not be, because on the original projects with "Free as a Bird" and "Real Love" and on the now and thens that I've heard the bootleg versions, they have the hiss. But Penn was saying that there was a sound of a television in the background. John was writing this song, and he turned the tape on, and he always watched TV while he was doing everything. And that is supposedly the sound. Now, if that's the sound, there was no television in the background of those other songs. So it may not be free as it may not be now and then.
When is the release date for this new song?
That I don't know.
I don't think they've announced it yet. I read about it at least once a week. I see it mentioned in the
Yeah.
press.
I may have heard September, but that seems pretty soon. So yeah, I'm not really sure. Maybe, yeah. I would assume before Christmas. I don't know if September's accurate, but I would assume by the end of the year. Usually that's a Beatle move.
As I was referring to this guy from Penn and Teller, Penn, I forget his first name. I don't know what makes him an authority on all this. I don't even recognize him as a friend of Paul. Of course, what do we know?
Is Giles Martin involved at all?
He is.
He is, okay.
Giles Martin. And that's very interesting as well, because they had Jeff Lynne before. So does this mean that Paul was unsatisfied with Jeff Lynne, or did he want to get it closer to George Martin?
I think that Giles has been involved with so much of the remixes over the past years that he couldn't do the original because he was wrapped up in the anthology with when I say original, Free as a Bird and Real Love. He was doing the anthology at that time. No, I think Paul was quite pleased with Jeff Lynne. In fact, I think Jeff Lynne worked with Paul afterwards, although he was nervous at first based upon reports because Jeff Lynne was George's friend. But I think Paul came around real quick on that.
Now, did Jeff Lynne work with Paul as a solo artist as well?
I believe after '95, he did work with him a little bit. I'm trying to remember as to what he actually did, but I think
the song "Beautiful Night."
That's it.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't remember what album that was.
Flame and Pie. Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, I believe he produced that album, or at least that song. I don't know.
That song, Ringo played drums on that.
Yeah.
All this stuff was announced, and we keep seeing reports every week. Fans were afraid that it was going to be AI doing something artificial, and they reassured everybody that it's only to separate John from either what was the noise or the television in the background. So I'm not worried about that. I just don't like. John said in an interview, I've been watching a lot of old John interviews lately. You put the word Beatles on it, and the public will accept anything, and that does seem to be the case. It's like they don't care. They don't know how to discern what's a good and a bad song once the name the Beatles is involved. What do you guys feel about that?
I agree. I think this is. If George was alive, would it come out? If they were both alive, George and John, would this song come out? I'm under the belief that if both of them lived longer, the Beatles would have gotten back together.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that, especially after listening to some of the interviews with John and George and reading some of the interviews. I think that would have eventually happened. How much influence does the estates have? I have no idea. How would I know? It just seems. I'm glad it's coming out. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to hear a new Beatles song. It just doesn't seem right with two of them not being here.
It doesn't. Let's face it. It's really a Paul solo. It's Paul being in charge of the Beatles, as the Beatles accused him of after Brian Epstein died. Now nobody's around to object, and Ringo's not going to object. Dave, what's your take on that?
Yeah, to a point. I mean, I like the, what do they call them? The special edition albums as they've been coming out. Revolver was the last one, and I do like those. Do either one of you have Sirius XM? Listen to the Beatles channel?
No, I
I
didn't.
don't have that. Yeah.
No, yeah. One thing I've noticed too that I'm curious on your opinions are a lot of the remastered songs, I should say remastered original songs, for example, Come Together. Whenever they play that song now, they always play the latest mixed version, which is a little bit different. How do you guys feel about those songs sort of replacing, um, the original? Because I am seeing that happen.
I haven't heard the new remix of that.
Oh, you haven't?
No, I
Oh,
haven't.
wow.
I haven't.
I mean, I love the outtakes and stuff like that. I mean, and I think as a fan, it's great. And the thing with an outtake is, it's new material, but there's no expectation of, no pressure, I guess, right? It's just archived material that is real versus now, coming out with a new single. There's certainly some pressure with that, right? It's different than, I guess there's a, certain expectation with a new, Beatles single coming out.
Yes. Seth, what were you going to say before?
I'm not a big fan of the remixes, but I do enjoy the extra material.
Yeah.
And I really like listening to the extra material, especially with the conversations that are taking place between the four.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what's new, not this new single. I like hearing the outtakes.
I mean, the best Beatle thing that came out, or post Beatle thing that came out, in my opinion, in past year or 2 years, is When Winter Comes that Paul did. They dug it out of the early Paul and Linda period when they were living in Scotland. I thought that was a terrific song.
Yeah, that was my favorite too. I remember messaging you, Len,
Yeah.
because that was on McCartney 3, and I asked you if you heard the song because his voice was, I'm like, there's no way that he recorded this in 2020.
Yeah.
His voice was real, it was like, 1969 Paul.
Sure.
But
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
it was I was so shocked. You don't often get surprises these days from any of them, So especially a song that was never bootlegged, it was never named, it was never, all the books that come out never mention it. So who knows how many other good things are in the catalog,
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit, and if we're through with this topic, we can throw it in later if you guys have any more to add about the new quote unquote Beatles single. But I have a lot to say about AI, these fake AI Beatles releases. You'll see Beatles AI, and then it'll be some title you never heard of. And inevitably, I try not to click on them, but I'll listen for like maybe 10 seconds and until I can't stand it anymore, because
Yeah.
they're always terrible. They either don't sound like John and Paul or George, or they do sound like Paul and John and George, but the music is just so mediocre. It makes you glad that they never got back together, if that was how it would have been. So, what do you guys think? Have you heard any of that stuff?
I have not.
I have. And it's like a rabbit hole, right? You click on it, and then I heard one the other day. Um, it was John Lennon singing Yesterday. So
Yeah,
of course I'm clicking on it, and
such a gimmick. Yeah.
it certainly was. But as I'm clicking on it, I'm thinking I don't remember him ever singing it. But this is curious, and
Yeah.
it was literally like a mashup of Paul and John singing at the same time,
Yeah.
and it was amazing because at times it sounded like John, but then as I'm listening to it, and then it would sound like Paul. So it was obviously it was weird, but um, I just hope in the future that these, I don't, our great grandchildren, are they going to be able to separate real Beatles from, or real artists from AI, and I guess that's my biggest fear, or concern with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm okay with it, but I just don't want it to replace and or eliminate the real stuff.
Well, they're thinking of doing that with actors as well, so they won't have to pay the actors. That's why there's a writer's strike and there's
Yeah.
an acting strike. And I don't know, maybe the musicians should go on strike as well
Some
because
of them I hope would go on strike. It's different because they're in the recording studio and they sing something out of key and they can remove the button and fix the vocal without them having to record. A lot of what's coming out, I don't find it to be real anyways. It's computer enhanced. And,
yeah,
and I mean, they've been doing it for years with the drum machines and the synthesizers and all the other gadgets that they've been using. The Beatles and other bands of the 60s used to create those sounds just by moving closer to the amp or
Yeah.
doing something else. It was a
Yeah.
lot more creativity than a computer changing everything.
now on the more positive note, I have picked out some good examples of fans. There's some really good stuff coming out by teenagers, but people of all ages, covers of Beatles songs.
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Little darling, the smiles returning to their faces. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I'll say it's alright.
At least it's real people singing it.
Mhm.
And in my opinion, the best covers are by women because you can't really compare the women to the real Beatles. There's no accusations that you're going to have to make about them copying John Paul, George, and Ringo's style. And I'm impressed with a lot of these uh, covers. Have you guys heard any of those?
I've heard two in particular. A group called the Mona Lisa Twins, the
Yes.
sisters. They're
Yeah.
fantastic. And Jasmine Commerce is another one that's done some Beatles songs.
Yeah.
She's very good as well. I think she's done a couple of George covers. Something or Here Comes the Sun, one of those two. She did a great job on that.
I did hear the Bengals version of "And Your Bird Can Sing." That's pretty good.
You guys are both on Facebook as I am, and there's a thing called it's a Beatles group. One's called Beatle John, and one's called Beatles something I forget, and they publish stories about the Beatles when they toured America at different points in their career. And there's some rare interviews that you can read the transcriptions of. And John seems to have the most interviews that were transcribed, and I saw a couple of really good ones. One was after their 1965 tour, I believe, and the DJ was asking John questions about American society and how do you like it and all that. And it was pretty interesting. It's not the same old, same old. It's things that were long forgotten about. So here's a question for you guys. You guys have read probably combined. I'm sure you've read a lot more than I have about Beatles interviews and commentary on the Beatles. Is there any Beatle interview or interviews that you guys remember that you would like to see again, but you haven't, that other people don't know about?
I would like to read Lennon Remembers again from the Rolling Stone interviews.
Yeah.
He was very bitter during that interview. But I did order on eBay a Life magazine with Paul and Linda on the cover, 1971 year.
Mhm.
And the headline on it says, Paul's going to tell his story now.
Hmm.
So I'm looking forward I'll have it in the mail probably within the next few days. I'm looking forward to see what Paul talks about. Again, it's within the year of the breakup, and how he refers to the breakup and the others. I'm interested in seeing that, but I can't think of anything that stands out.
It's interesting you say that because that would be the one that I would pick, except, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Life magazine article started by the photographer or somebody going on his property on his farm, and he got really angry.
Remember that.
And I think that interview was a result of him apologizing and agreeing to do it if he was able to get the photographs that were taken and maybe recordings. I'm not sure of him getting angry and throwing them off his property. I think that would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's some interviews with interesting things in it. John often hosted different shows, most notably Mike Douglas, and I think he was on Merv Griffin at one time. But he also did the same thing with what we would view as unknown people, and he really liked to ham it up and make believe he was a DJ, and they let him do it because he was John Lennon, and it was they were quite amusing, you know. There's one particular George interview that I would like to hear again, and I don't know what year it was, but now George was always the most negative as far as wanting to get back together. He would always give very flippant answers. Well, the Beatles will not get back together as long as John remains dead. I'm sure you remember that quote. But another, this is probably in the 70s, or the late 70s, where George said, I wonder if we'll ever be, and I think this was the last quote in that interview, will the sum of us be ever as good as we were as a whole? Which was a funny thing for George to say. Maybe I have the wording a little bit wrong. Do you remember that, Seth?
I don't recall that quote. I know he said a lot of negative things, and I do remember the Lennon quote. I saw a great George interview today that was done in the late '80s. That he was joined on stage by Ringo, and that's on YouTube, and that was quite humorous. And he talked a lot about his relationship with Paul McCartney, and how the press has always made them to be negative. And he said there was a time that we really didn't speak all that much, but he said we've known each other our whole lives, and the press can write whatever they want. We know how we feel about each other.
Yeah.
And he said, and I know the truth, so I'll stay with that. And I really don't care about the press. But that was a really good interview. It was on a TV show in England.
Yeah.
I forget the name. I think it was called Aspen and something like that. It was the host.
It's also come out quite recently that George pretty much wrote every song almost. Correct me if I'm wrong. Every single that Ringo came out with, George at least had a co-writing, uncredited written song.
Well, he wrote Photograph, and
Did.
I think it was Lennon that wrote I'm the Greatest.
Yeah. It Don't Come Easy. Did he have
there is a bootleg on YouTube with George singing.
With George singing,
Yes.
yeah. I don't know if he has writing credit for that song, but I know he I know the point you're making is a lot of Ringo's #1 hits. George always had a hand or was involved in some way.
That was very generous of George, because people kind of criticize George as a solo artist as not having as many hits as John and Paul, or as his promise was after all things must pass. Everyone expected to have a lot more material out of George. He took 5 years off, I believe. Or I don't know, or was that just John? John took 5 years off.
No, George did the Somewhere in England album. No, I think he did Gone Tropple. Somewhere in England, Gone Tropple. Then it was 5 years before Cloud 9 came out.
Yeah, that's right.
And then 15 years before Brainwashed.
They trashed Cloud 9 for having nothing to do with the current state of music. because he didn't hop on to any trends that were around at that time. You know,
That was produced by Jeff Lynne, I believe, also,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
yeah, I enjoyed the Traveling Wilburys, and
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
and I was reading another thing on Facebook about how the Traveling Wilburys came about by accident when Jeff Lynne was producing Just Roy Orbison, and they just kind of all went over there one by one because they were all in the same city, Los Angeles, together, and they decided to do George wrote a song for the occasion, and that's what started it off. Pretty interesting. But anyway, do you guys have anything else?
I'd like to hear about David's trip. I'm going there to London and Liverpool next May, and I'd like to hear a little bit about his experience.
That's
Yep.
right.
And that's what I wanted to share. So are you going to Liverpool?
I'm going to go to London for the first 3 or 4 days, and then take
Okay.
the train to Liverpool.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Is it because I know you're taking your daughter, is it a
Yes.
Beatle trip or is it a,
It's a Beatles trip. She knows
Okay.
I've been talking about this for years, and she's a
that's
fan
great.
as well.
Yeah. So I can kind of sum up, if you're going to Liverpool, you have to do the National Trust tour of
Okay.
Lennon and McCartney childhood homes. That was the greatest. That's the one thing that, starting with Liverpool, we did, and I took my 15-year-old son, and it was a Beatle trip, but it was also we're going to London and Liverpool, and my son was very good, but I also tried to, do other things besides Beatles with it, to keep him. But the best thing for me was John Lennon's home, the Menlove Avenue. That was interesting. Seeing it through my son's eyes as we were, just in the home and looking at different things, just seeing his excitement, and see him realize how lucky he was at the time. That was special for me. You can't take pictures inside. And so it was funny. The tour guide, as we were driving to Paul McCartney's home, he made a statement that, this home, which was 20 Forthland Road, he said, this home is arguably the most important home in rock and roll history. And then he quoted, I want to say he said there were over 100 songs were written in that house, which is amazing. I didn't even know that. And you get a book about each house, and I guess the difference between the two homes is McCartney's home was that this whole thing was put together by his brother Michael, and it was all put together with pictures. So none of it, I mean, I shouldn't say none of it. I don't know for sure, but I think most of it is not original. It was recreated essentially. But the one thing that's, stuck out to me being in that home, besides like the little fireplace and the picture of, John and Paul with their guitars facing each other. I think it's when they were writing "She Loves You." It's a famous picture. If you saw it, you'd know it. But thinking about that, but then can you imagine being able to go back to your childhood home when you're 10 years old? Just so, and I remember a quote from Michael McCartney where he said that when he stepped into the living room or stepped into the house, he could smell his mom's, I don't remember whether her soap or something, but I thought that was really special to look at it from, not only from, you're in, a legend's house, right? But to be able to go back in time just as a person, right? And I'd give anything to go back to my childhood home, when I was 10 years old, and you walk in, you're going to see things that you don't even remember, right? It's pretty special from that aspect of it.
So they actually let you inside the homes.
They do. It's a
All
tour
of
of the homes. Yep.
Oh, I thought you just saw the outside.
Yeah, no, you actually get to go in the homes. So, we did the Magical Mystery Tour, which was great. Going on the Magical Mystery Bus, and you go through Penny Lane, and
Mhm.
and you see the outside of the homes, which was great. You stop at Strawberry Fields, and a couple different landmarks. George's house outside, right? So you take some pictures, but um, yeah. I don't remember the station, but you get picked up at a railway station in Liverpool. You get on this, it's a little van, not many people, each tour. And so we went to John Lennon's house first. You can take pictures outside, no pictures indoors. But another thing that was really cool was the front door. Um, this literally, I'd say this room is probably, so it's behind the front door, probably 2 by 3, and it might even be smaller than that. But they tell you go into that room, close the door, and they tell you to sing. I wasn't singing. You hear the acoustics from, John used to play his guitar there. That was a pretty special experience. Um, Things that I was thinking about, like there's a picture of John, and I guess I call it a famous picture, probably that we've all seen, where him pouring a cup of tea with the kettle and the real small stove. So because there weren't a lot of pictures of inside the home that I was familiar with, but that was one of them. So sure enough, when I walked in the kitchen, I'm like, yep, this is really it. um, but yeah, that was I would say you have to do the National Trust tour of the Beatles' childhood homes. The Magical Mystery Tour was great, but you could do a lot of that stuff on your own too.
Mhm.
But we were only in Liverpool for a day and a half. We spent one night, so we got there really early in the morning, and then we left 2 p.m. the next day. Um, we went to the cavern, or it's not the original cavern, which that's like right across the street, but they had a lot of plumbing issues at the time we were there. So I wasn't able to go into um, part of it, but there's a Beatle museum that's right there on Matthew Street also, and it's actually Neil Aspinall's son, Rogue Best, who and we actually saw Rogue Best when we were in the Beatles Museum, because it's a museum that he put together. So that was our only Beatles sighting. But I was telling Lynn we missed Mike McCartney by 5 minutes.
I saw that on Facebook.
Yeah. But then that would have been really cool. That's what it was. He said he could smell his mom's lavender. That was the quote, but it just really cool. And then in London, it was more. We went to Abbey Road a couple of times, walked the crosswalk, and that's a busy street.
Mhm.
And I think actually the only picture that we got was me texting my wife saying, "Yeah, we're about to cross," and she got the recording from the webcam. There's a 24-hour webcam, so I was able to go back and get the footage of us crossing, because it's a really busy street, and so many people are just stopping traffic, and so I didn't really want to do that. So we didn't get the typical great picture of us right there, but I was fine with that. We did a tour with the Beatles' Brain of Britain. They call him Richard Porter, and the tour ends. It's like a walking tour, and it ends at Abbey Road and Abbey Road Studios. And one of the guys that was on the tour, the guy's talking, and he literally walks into the parking lot of Abbey Road Studios and started to walk in the door. And the tour guy didn't like that, because they tell you ahead of time, you can't go in, but he almost got in. And I think if he got in, he wouldn't have turned around. But I was just saying to Lynn, I think if I had my choice of any landmark I think I would pick Studio 2, Abbey Road Studios. But the childhood homes would be a close second. But who knows if they'll ever open up the studios again to the public. I think they did it a couple of years ago, maybe for the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road, or but I'm sure that cost a lot of money. But right now it's closed to the public, but it is a working studio. You do see people coming and going, and you know, there's a lot going on there.
Did you get a sense of how far John lived from Paul? Was it walkable? Or George too?
Yeah, so walkable, in the sense of I think it was walkable, but a couple miles.
Okay.
You know, 5-10 minute ride in the car, maybe. Yeah, no more than 10 minutes, but um, yeah, certainly not up the block. Um, and
So
I
did
don't
you
know.
pick John's house? It was a tour of all of their houses, but you picked John's, the interior.
Yeah, so it was basically Lennon, and the tour was the National Trust tour. You go to John Lennon's house, and then you go to Paul McCartney's house. So
Oh,
you go to both of them. You have equal time in both of them,
mm,
and you know, no pictures inside. And then the only thing in Paul's house, and I think, I don't know if I got to finish this thought, but um, so John Lennon's home was actual furniture and everything, because he bought his Aunt Mimi I think it was a house in, I think it's called Dorset, or I'm not sure where, but she moved out of there in like 1965. And then so that house, somebody lived there for close to 30 years, and I think Yoko Ono purchased the property, and then she donated it to the National Trust.
with all the original furniture.
With all the original furniture came from Aunt Mimi's home, that, you know, when she passed away. So the difference between the two homes was John Lennon's home was actual real, you know, furniture that was actually there, you know, when he lived there.
So the piano at Paul's house that was Paul's father's, that wasn't there, but they wrote all those songs on because they
Yeah,
kept it
no, I don't think. I think because they may have talked about that and said that Paul has that, but I could be wrong. But that's a good question. And couldn't take any pictures inside, so pretty sure there was a piano there, but you know, I don't remember. There's just so much, you know, that you're trying to take in, and I do know there's a drain pipe in the backyard that Paul used to climb up and get in and climb into the bathroom window to get into the house when either his dad wasn't home, or maybe he was sneaking in after hours. And that upstairs bathroom, you could not go in that bathroom. And I don't remember the reason why, but otherwise you could go everywhere else in the house. You know, their bedrooms, and it was a small home.
Ryman writing about himself. He came in through the bathroom window.
Yeah. And then so that was really, you know, Liverpool, and you know, it was a great atmosphere. Certainly, you know, a lot of live bands and stuff like that going on. That you know, I had limited access, having my son with me. The night we were there, you know, we went and got fish and chips, and you know, we kind of walked around the area. Didn't take a lot of that in, but we did see some live music at the Cavern Bar, which is like next door to the original Cavern. Um, I didn't, you know, we drove through Penny Lane in the Magical Mystery Tour bus. I didn't spend a lot of time, you know, in Penny Lane, and I guess thinking about it ahead of time, you know, I thought, yeah, we'll go and get a haircut at the barber shop and stuff like that. But, you know, we didn't do anything like that because, you know, our time was limited. But, and you know, the same thing in London. I saw 3 Savile Row, which is now a department store, and I don't remember the name of the department store now, but for some reason, I don't know if it wasn't open or I tried to open the front door and I couldn't get in. And I had said to my son ahead of time, I said, we're going up on that roof. And I Googled it, and you pretty much can't get up there. And if you do, you need to be, somebody special. But there was a freight elevator to the left of the front door, and I did walk up to it, and I looked at my son, and I'm like, let's do it. He's like, Dad, I'm not bailing you out of jail. So we didn't do that. But got to look up, and it's a 3-story building. I think it's when you see footage of the rooftop concert, it's I guess it appears bigger than life, but it's just a small street in London, and just trying to imagine a concert like that going on. It had to have been heard for miles.
They use wide angle lenses on that.
Yeah. We saw Wimple Street, the Asher home. And that's where, Paul was staying when he wrote Yesterday, and there's a music room downstairs. So I took a picture, that where a lot of songs were, written in that home. Saw a few other, a couple of scenes from Help were recorded in a neighborhood, so things like that. But it was really great to be there. Something I'll never forget.
Great. I hope to get there someday myself. Seth, any words for us?
I'm excited to go there. And going back to Abbey Road, I remember Paul was telling a story about when he's been in London and in the car on Abbey Road, and he got stuck in traffic, and he was quite upset until he realized that the reason he's stuck in traffic is because people were recreating the album cover.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's been stuck in that traffic as well.
Yep, and he has a home, Cavendish Avenue, 7 Cavendish Avenue, which is a walk. It's a 5-minute walk, if that, from Abbey Road Studios, and we made the walk, and we heard Paul wasn't in London at the time, but he's been known to come to his gate, and it's hit or miss. I don't know how much he would do it now, but back in the day, I mean, because he bought that home in, I want to say 1965, and he still uses it to this day, obviously with his other homes, but he's been known to make the walk from there to the studio, or go out and use public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a great public transportation system. They call it the Tube, I think. Really, once you get the hang of it, it's a really great way to get around.
All right, guys. So I think we should end this because it's going to turn into 2 shows.
Yep.
Join us again next time for another edition of the Beatlemaniacs. And until then, I'm Len.
I'm Dave.
I'm Seth.
And we are the
Beatlemaniacs.